Hello, Billy Bob and uh, participants and Blowback and other comrades. Alexander Fraser Kantrowitz. uh, Ironically, because you just addressed the national question with those three names of mine. But anyway, I just wanted to I felt compelled actually to make a comment or some comments about the last presentation. I made some notes before, I did so. Actually, it's going on more than a, page here. I'll try to be succinct. I think what you're all missing is a reading or a reading, let's say, of Lenin and other authors. Two crucial works to start with: Lenin and his work pamphlet. Well, as I saw it from the Communist Party USA 30 years ago, I think, and other sources. But I believe there's one work Lenin wrote on the question of national self-determination. And what I took away from a reading of that was, I think a fairly careful reading of that, although, I'm no expert on this topic. And this was 30 years ago, but what really stuck with me was the working class is the basis for a nation. In a developed, let's say, semi-feudal or capitalist nation state, it is the working class. It's not the shopkeepers, the coffee shop owners, the lawyers, the doctors, the yuppies, the sons and daughters of sredny, middle peasants. It's the working class. What do they want in terms of a national identity? But then the thorny, the question becomes more thorny because, as I think Max Perry mentioned, the Russian Empire or the Soviet Union or even Russian today is made up of like more than 100 different nationalities, and not all of them have entered, or back then, let's say, 100 years ago, had not entered this what do they call it? The circuitry, the capitalist system. Had not been touched by the world capitalist system. Directly in that, they didn't develop a working class. And that was as regards to Ukraine, that was a big problem because, and that's why Lenin and the Bolsheviks insisted, I guess, over the objections of those in eastern Ukraine, that eastern Ukraine should join with central and western Ukraine in order to socialize. It's like what the farther right wingers call social engineering. That is basically Lenin and the Bolsheviks hoped to graft the eastern conscious working class of eastern Ukraine, based in mining and industry, onto the more hick central and western Ukraine, and especially western Ukraine. It very much seems that from going to the Russian Ethnographic Museum and talking with former comrades, basically western Ukraine was dominated by kulaks. Or they were at least relatively more prosperous. Plus, you had the poisonous influence of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and, the Polish imperial project and etc., right? So, Galicia, etc., Western Ukraine, Volhynia, I guess, that was a very difficult situation, very, socially backward, agrarian, and, with a poisonous Western, right-wing influence, fascist influence. So, other works, To See the Dawn, published by everyone's favorite Pathfinder Press, the formerly American Trotskyist movement. But that book is important because the it was published under, I guess, according to Pathfinder at least, under the imprimatur of Lenin and Zinoviev. Zinoviev at the time being the head of the Communist International. And it was basically the minutes and motions passed of the 1920 Congress of the Peoples of the Far East, which took place in Baku, Azerbaijan, and had 2,000 delegates. And you're talking about everywhere from Uzbekistan, I believe India, Vietnam, China, etc. And, I read it that because, obviously I spent some time in, what was called the Far East, farthest east, Japan, studied it for 5 years, the language, the history, etc., and the anti-colonial struggles against Japanese imperialism and Western imperialism, etc. And what I took away from a perusal of that, the minutes, I mean, a lot of it is kind of dense and not very, engaging reading, I suppose. At least 30 years ago, for, the young version of me, it wasn't. Demoralized version, I mean, it was 1992 or 3, probably. Anyway, but what I took away was that, if you have what the Chinese would have called the barbarian nations, let's say, of Central Asia, what the delegates posited was that to back up a step, looking at the Cossacks, who are sort of like a proto-Asian, rebellious peasant people who became basically the punishers of the Tsarist regime. Within the Cossack people, you had the Ottomans and you had the people who were more the rank-and-file Cossacks. And that, I believe, from memory of 30 years ago, there was then under the influence of capitalism, you had a social differentiation there between the Ottomans, the heads, and the the plebeian, let's call them, Cossacks. And similarly with the Central Asian nations, you had clans that were more powerful and clans that were less powerful. And so what tended to happen, I guess in this period from reading those minutes, was that the less powerful clans came into conflict with the more powerful clans, and that the delegates to this Congress, being communist militants from those lands, they wanted to encourage the the sub-clans and the more, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, proletarian, non-wealthy elements of those peoples. I guess this would be clans, basically, there, that they wanted to encourage those less wealthy clans to basically struggle against the wealthier clans and the heads of those clans. So a class struggle, pre-capitalist, let's call it class struggle. And, it was very difficult, though, and, understanding from, a comrade over here, that, the push was against religion, like among the Jews in the Pale of the Settlement. Mostly Jews rejected religion by this time, let's call it 1900, 1920, etc., especially after the October Revolution. But that was not as much the case in Central Asia. There was a period where, I guess, religion was being struggled against, that their version of the hijab, burqa, what have you. I think there was a famous Soviet movie, White Son of the Desert, I think, Sun. A Russian commissar, I believe, comes to something like Uzbekistan and interacts with the local people. And, I believe there was at least one scene about, the struggle against whatever they called the burqa there. What else? So, anyway, but, that would be, like Lenin said of the Russian peasants, even, it would take some generations for those people to become civilized, to advance, and as Marxists, we don't look at it as, oh, we're all just multicultural and we're all equal. No. There are stages in history, and one can, I agree, I think, the Bolshevik position was one can make great leaps. When I was in university, I liked to be around the African students because they were the most political and, revolutionary, actually. Ethiopians or who else? South Africans, and other nationalities I knew. My roommate was Kenyan, actually connected to Barack Obama's family. Interestingly enough, that was more of a CIA counter-revolutionary thing, but nevertheless, anyway, anyway. So as regards Ukraine, though, it's a very thorny question. I'm no expert on it. There's also there was a comrade, Roman Rozdolsky, and he wrote a piece. Apparently, it was translated into English. You can look it up. I sent it to you, Billy, via Messenger. He wrote a piece against Engels' interpretation of Ukraine as an ahistoric or non-nation, I don't know, how much of that is special pleading, but, further, at the same time that Lenin was struggling on the question of and the Bolsheviks were struggling on the question of the National Party, there was a guy, Bolshevik. There's a pamphlet put out by the International IIRE, I think it was, Research and Education, Fourth International, based in Amsterdam, and I forget the guy's name. I think it's Louis. I think the French Trotskyist, but they described, not very well, but I had the pamphlet, and but it at least alerted me to the debates between the question of national self-determination and Lenin's writings primarily, but the Bolshevik position. Versus the social democratic position and Böhm Bawerk's from, I guess he was from Vienna or Austria, basically supporting cultural autonomy, which is also what the Bunds, that's a whole other complex question, but fascinating for myself and other Jewish intellectuals. But that the Bund, the Jewish Bund, promoted cultural autonomy, like they were also social democrats, and generally, you have to look at it historically, materially. Why did these two ideological currents arise? And, basically Lenin was trying to base himself in the working class and the poor peasantry, etc., in the dictatorship of the proletariat, whereas Böhm and the Social Democrats, the Austro-Hungarian, later Yugoslavian approach was cultural autonomy. That is, each nation has its own there's a Yiddish word, Banzer, for the Buntist heads. But each nation has its own titular heads and its own ideology of nationalism and schools and infrastructure and everything. Well, what Lenin said was that is the ideology of the Rebbe in his debate with the Bunds. And the Rebbes, the Jewish people, are our friends and allies and comrades, but particularly the Jewish working class. But the Rebbes are our enemies. They are the atavistic leftovers from the age of feudalism and even prior, I suppose. And that gets into the whole tribalism, right? My grandmother once told myself and my brother, I remember, from many years ago when I was like 9 or 10, our tribe is the tribe of Judah. And, pointing to the Hanukkah candle box. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then, interacting with other, Jews and Jewish nationalists, you can see there's this kind of, 100 years ago, well, who knows, but, there is that sort of tribalism in the background, which is very, what's the word, outmoded, reactionary, basically. And probably in a lot of ways even more reactionary ideologically than Ukrainian, integralism. Although, whatever, the Jews were very oppressed, 100 years ago, let's say, over here. It's sort of like, some sort of nonsense some weird black nationalists would make up, I guess, in America. Well, okay, but blacks are oppressed in America, or historically have been oppressed in America. You can excuse the nuttiness, I guess, the backwardness. Similarly with the Jews 100 years ago. Now, not so much, but, given what the Zionists are doing in Gaza. And then Luxembourg's position. Luxembourg, that was very interesting. She was from Zamość, Poland, and, that's deep into the southeast of Poland, and, sort of, parts of that as you get into Ukraine become kind of pied noir, is my impression. And so I think as a Jew, a Polish Jew, living under sort of Polish nationalists or alongside, Polish Jews were oppressed by Polish nationalists. Oh yeah, rapes, murders, being barred from entering university, boycotts of stores, inability to develop, overall it was the Polish aristocracy's inability to develop the nation, which led to the, tragedies that followed, whether that be Volhin, the massacre of Poles by Ukrainian nationalists, Polish peasants in Ukraine, is probably, Polish settlers, osadniki, oppressors, possibly. I'm no expert, but, that was our experience, too, in Western Soviet Belarus, although, it's complicated. Not all Poles were, occupiers. They were, there for hundreds of years, as were the Jews. So Rosa Luxemburg's, as the liberals say, lived experience, or as the Marxists say, historical material experience, was such that, I can really understand how she would be very against, whatever you want to call it, Eastern European nationalism, because, generally it's been, very reactionary. And in terms of Ukraine, well, who are we talking about? I guess in, the case of Western Ukraine, it would be a question of poor, and generally the Bolshevik policy was, the poor peasants are our most reliable allies. The middle peasants, are bisexual. They can go either way, and the rich peasants or kulaks are our enemies. And I was reading one book on the fight against the OUN, etc., UPA. I believe it was after World War II. And the Soviet government was pretty ham-handed, according to this author, and I believe it, in the way it kind of made distinctions, especially with middling peasants. And the question of collectivization, think of the peasants what you will. I mean, I'm not a big fan, but I don't see the terrible nature of collectivization when you really read about what a collective was. But nevertheless, Lenin even pointed out, cooperatives not collectives at first for a whole period. Actually. So, so there were big, mistakes and crimes there from the Soviet side against the Ukrainian, people, I would say. And at the same time, as Isaac Deutscher described, Eastern European nationalism, they were brutal, nervous, and hysterical. I think I described that other stuff. And again, anyway, so basically, I think I've covered that all. And so, finally, I would say, the question of imperialism, it's going to be a bloody struggle, right? And, someone remarked, well, if we can just make imperialism go away, or, if imperialism stops meddling, well, unfortunately, I think, Lenin, when he looked at the different vectors of the world situation, after, or, from 1914, actually, he said, there's there's the imperialist war, there's the class war, and there's the war for national self-determination as well. And we want to encourage the last two, national self-determination and the war of the workers and the peasants against the bourgeoisie. So, these questions will be relevant, and these, in terms of nationality and class, that's the determinant, how that interacts with the national identity, and that, you simply can't say, okay, well, Russia less shitty, now we're going to have Ukraine fucked up. Now Ukraine will exist under a Russian umbrella, and these national questions of Ukrainian identity are settled. You can't do that without basically dictatorship of the proletariat. That the or a struggle, for the supremacy of not nationality, but of the proletariat, the working class, the leading sections, the and basically today it's like, how many peasants really are there, I guess. So it's basically the working class as regards Russia and Ukraine. And I guess with Ukraine it's going to be a very difficult subject, because the traders destroyed so much industry, even more than here in Russia. I think in Russia it's like 25 to 33% of the industry is left, but in Ukraine, I don't know how much is left. And Western Ukraine, a comrade who no longer lives in Western, she lives in Crimea. She said when she was growing up, it was basically home healthcare workers, old folks' home workers, toilet cleaners, etc. Just real shit jobs, and people had to maybe go to Poland for that or farther west a lot of times too. So. I don't, Ukraine is a mess from what I can see. I'll probably go there when there's peace, but obviously not now. But yeah, so anyway, anything else? Yeah, so basically the question of class. As regards Ukraine versus and Russia, their relationship, and yeah, I think the working class has just been like, oh well, we in the past 10 years since I've been coming over here, the attitude was kind of like we love Coca-Cola, Blue Jeans, the Beatles, David Bowie, whatever, and F the class struggle. And those Bolshevik maniacs. Well, sorry, Pavel and Svetlana. Now you're going to have to contend with these big historical questions, and since you've ignored them, shit's got like all fucked up. So, moving forward, can the intellectuals and the workers get it together to, build a movement basically, or movements in these different countries. Ukraine in its different regions, Russia in its different regions, and even Belarus. So